To begin with, we have to understand what the situation was around the time of the birth of Habib Giorgis. Habib Giorgis was born in 1876, so near the end of the 19th century or the last quarter of the 19th century. And the Coptic Orthodox Church had just come out of 5 centuries of severe persecution under the Mamluks first, and then after this, the Ottoman period. So the Mamluk dynasty and the Ottoman dynasty, they were 2 Islamic dynasties that where the Copts suffered a lot of suffering and persecution. For example, Copts may come to the church on Sunday and they would force the churches to all be painted inside with black paint. So imagine you come into your church and you don't find beautiful icons and iconostasis and all of this, and all you find is black walls. Imagine what effect this had on the followers, the Christians. Also, they were forced to wear black clothes as well. They were forced to wear 8-pound crosses around their neck. So imagine how heavy these crosses were. And also it caused at the back of their neck to make a mark in blue on their bone. So that's where this term blue-boned or adma zar'a in Arabic came about the Christians in Egypt, because they had to wear these heavy crosses. Also, they were not allowed to ride on horses, but to humiliate them, they only allowed them to ride on donkeys. And men were only allowed to ride the donkey's side saddle to even humiliate them more. And many, many other persecutions through 5 centuries before the 19th century under the Mamluk and the Ottoman dynasties. So all of this had a great effect on the Copts. In fact, it weakened the church, it weakened the Coptic language, and also people became less educated in their faith because of all of this suffering and persecution. And unfortunately, it led also to a lot of illiteracy and even a lot of uneducated clergy. For example, at that time, there was no patriarch or bishop or priest or deacon or lay person that was educated in the Coptic faith, unfortunately. So you may ask me, what would happen on Sunday morning at the liturgy? Was there a sermon, for example? Not that many people were actually coming to church, but those that were, the priest or the bishop would pull out an old manuscript and they would read a few pages from it, and that would be the sermon. But of course, that's not how we preach. But unfortunately, that was the situation back then. In all of Egypt at that time, there was one erudite priest, and his name was Father Philithaus Ibrahim Baghdadi. And he was a very eloquent preacher, and he would go from church to church in Cairo, in Alexandria, all the way down to the south to Aswan, preaching and teaching the people. And wherever he went, the churches were full, and even people were standing around the windows, thirsty to hear the word of God and to learn about their faith. And so the churches were overflowing wherever he went. Sometimes his sermons went on for 3 hours, and people were not hesitant still to go because they were wanting to learn about their faith. But in fact, there was no formal education in Egypt at the time, and it was a system called Kutab system, and maybe in Ethiopia and Eritrea was also something similar, where a cantor would gather children in the courtyard of the church and teach them using memorization methods or rote learning, so that they would, for example, learn the book of Psalms by heart. They would learn the Gospels. It would teach them basic arithmetic and science and things like this in a very basic way. At the time, in 1805, Muhammad Ali Pasha was the ruler of Egypt. He was an Albanian, and he was appointed by the Turks so that he would rule Egypt, him and his follower or his descendants, all the way till the mid-1950s. And he was a person who wanted to do reform in Egypt in education, but his main goal was actually to form a very strong army. So he began to send some people to Europe to study, to come back to open military schools, but he disdained the education of the Copts and neglected the education of the Copts. His main goal was to establish a strong army so that he could control the whole region that he was responsible for. So at that time, in the history, was the time of Pope Cyril IV, the Coptic patriarch. He was patriarch from 1854 till 1861, a very short period of time. And he began, when he saw the Western missionaries come into Egypt, he began to establish schools for Coptic boys and also several schools for Coptic girls so that he could educate them. And he learned from what the Western missionaries were doing, who had come into Egypt by the middle of the 19th century. And he also brought into Egypt the second printing press. The first printing press had come in by the government. He brought into Egypt the second printing press. He was not in Cairo at the time, and the printing press came from Europe and arrived at Cairo train station, and he requested from his clergy and deacons to have a procession for the printing press from Cairo train station to the Patriarchate, and said at the time that if he was in Cairo, he would have danced in front of the printing press as David the prophet danced in front of the Ark of the Covenant. A very strange thing for a patriarch to say, but he said this because
Stayed, are you muted? I think like it just muted.
okay, can you hear me? Okay, what was the last thing I said? I cannot hear you.
You were just talking about the dancing, the patriarch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the patriarch said that he would have danced in front of the printing press as David the prophet danced in front of the Ark of the Covenant, because he believed that this printing press would start publishing lots of material so that the Copts would then begin to read and begin to be enlightened, and that this period of darkness would end. At that time, also Western missionaries had come into Egypt from Europe, from the UK in particular, and from America. And their first goal was to convert Muslims to Christianity. And they failed dismally. And so they began to point towards the Copts, and they began to send back home to their countries, telling their parishioners, we have found the people that call themselves Christians, but they don't know anything about their faith, and we need to rebaptize them and make them Christians again. But they did not have also that much success. But the good thing they did was to establish high caliber schools, which the Copts learned from. So this three matters in particular that were tearing away at the very thread of Coptic identity. First was pressures from the government on the church and not allowing the church full freedom to carry out its role within the faithful. Secondly, was the work of the Western missionaries in Egypt and trying to convert Copts to Protestantism and Catholicism. And thirdly, was an internal struggle within the Coptic Orthodox Church between the hierarchy, between the bishops and the patriarch and the lay elite. They were lay people that were very highly educated either in some of these Western schools, or they went to Europe to study there. And so they thought that they were more educated than the clergy, and a clash began to happen over who would control the finances, who would control the education at the schools. And this caused a big problem. One of the main problems that happened was that Pope Cyril V, who was the longest reigning patriarch in our history from 1874 till 1927, 53 years, was banished to one of the desert monasteries in Wadi Natrun for a period of about 6 months. And this, of course, caused a lot of problems for the church. Not having its leader with all of these problems going on was a very difficult thing. So you can imagine that Habib Giorgis was born in this atmosphere in 1876 when all of these matters were going along. But I want to read to you what Pope Shenouda III, how he describes Habib Giorgis during this period of darkness. This is what Pope Shenouda III of blessed memory says. He says, our teacher, Archdeacon Habib Giorgis, pioneer of religious education in our generation, started his life in an age that was almost void of religious education and knowledge. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. As the book of Genesis describes, then God said, let there be light, and there was light, and the light was Habib Giorgis. So Pope Shenouda here is describing Habib Giorgis as a light that was sent into the world to eradicate this ignorance and return back to the church the importance of religious education and theological education. So it is a very important quote from Pope Shenouda III. So Habib Giorgis, then you forget to speak a bit more in detail about him. As I mentioned, was born in 1876, and he fell asleep on August 21, 1951. So he lived for about 75 years, and he fell asleep on the eve of the feast of Saint Mary. I'm not sure if in the Eritrean church also you celebrate the feast of Saint Mary on August 22. So the day before is the feast of Habib Giorgis, because he was canonized as a saint in our church on June 20, 2013. So we consider him a saint for all of the work that he did in order to save the church from ignorance and from the lack of education that was at the time. His father's name was Giorgis Mankarios. He died in 1882 when Habib Giorgis was only 6 years old. And so you can imagine a young child losing his father at this age would not have been easy for him. But his mother, Miriam, she died in 1939, but she was sick most of her life and bedridden. But she took care of Habib Giorgis and his siblings, because he had 3 other siblings, Ghali, who died as a youth, Kamel, and Martha. And she sent Habib Giorgis to the great Coptic school, which was next to or adjacent to the old Patriarchate buildings. And there he excelled in his studies, completed his elementary and secondary school. By that time, in November of 1893, Pope Cyril V saw that there was a great need to establish a seminary because clergy were not educated in theology, unfortunately. And so the seminary opened its doors in November of 1893, and Habib Giorgis was the first among about 40 students that joined the seminary then. But unfortunately, for the first 4 years of the seminary, there was no teacher of religion and theology. And the students complained, but they could not find a teacher. And so many of them left. And so during this time, one day they thought, well, maybe we can bring in this eloquent preacher, Father Philithaus Ibrahim Baghdadi, to teach the students. And they did so. He lasted for about 2 weeks. He was very old by that stage. And one day in the class, he collapsed. They carried him home and he died a few days later. But Habib Giorgis was not the type of person to give up easily. So he went into the Patriarchal Library, which was a very rich library of books, and he began to read and to study and to research. And he writes himself saying that he did not leave any page unturned until he had read everything that was in this library and taught himself theology and religion. And when they saw that he was so advanced in his studies, the dean at the time, whose name was Yusuf Mankarios, then appointed him to teach the first year students that were coming in while he was still in his final year of study. And a few months later, when he completed his degree, then they appointed him full-time to teach theology and religion. One of the first lectures, or the first lecture actually that he gave, was at the great Coptic school near the end of his study, and it was titled Christian Religion, Ad-Diyana al-Masihiyya. And this lecture he divided over 2 weekends or 2 Sundays. In the first part of the lecture, he begins to speak to his audience about the glories of the early church of Alexandria, and begins to tell them about Saint Mark the Apostle and how he came to preach Christianity in Alexandria. And after this, He speaks to them about the Holy Family coming into Egypt before this, and the visit of the Holy Family. He speaks to them about the era of persecution and martyrdom and how many thousands of young and old that were suffering and died for their Christian faith. And that is why we begin our Coptic calendar on the 11th of September 284 with the beginning of the reign of the Roman Emperor Diocletian, who persecuted the Christians in Egypt. And so every year, this is our new Coptic year. And also spoke to them about the great doctors and pillars of the church, like Athanasius and Cyril and Dioscorus and many others, and great teachers in the church. And also spoke to them about the age of monasticism and how the work of Saint Anthony and how monasticism began in Egypt. This was the first part of the lecture. In the second Sunday, he then begins to say, let us now move to look at our state now and look at the dismal state that we have reached. And now, because of all of this suffering that we have gone through, now we don't have clergy that are educated. There is illiteracy everywhere. Let us put our hands together to begin reforming our church and begin to return back the glories of the early centuries of the Church of Alexandria. In attendance at this lecture was the editor-in-chief of a very important Coptic newspaper called Egypt or Misr, and his name was Tadros Bek Shinud al-Mankabadi. And the editor-in-chief was so impressed by this young preacher, he asked to get a copy of the lecture, and he began to publish thousands of copies to distribute to Christians in Egypt to read and to understand the history and where we have reached and how we should work together to begin reforming the Coptic Orthodox Church again. The second lecture he gave was in a church in one of the suburbs in Cairo called Harat al-Sa'ayin. And there, as he was about to begin preaching, he finds the Pope had heard about him and walks into the church, stands on his throne, papal throne, and he begins, as Habib Giorgis begins preaching, he begins blessing him with the cross, begins blessing the people, and felt a great joy that education and enlightenment is going to return back to the church through this bright young preacher, Habib Giorgis. And from that time then, Habib Giorgis became the personal disciple of Pope Kyrillos V, and he ordained him as an archdeacon. He would have a meeting with him every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. to ask his opinion on many matters, and also would invite him to attend the Holy Synod meeting whenever the Synod gathered for important synodical decisions. After this, in 1898, the Synod put out a decree about the importance of educating the young children. And the following year, in 1899, Pope Cyril V puts out a similar decree speaking about the importance of the education, religious education of the young, and teaching them about hygiene, teaching them the importance of coming to church on Sunday, the importance of partaking in Holy Communion, and many, many other matters. And then from the Synod, a third decree in 1903, also speaking about the same thing. So when Habib Giorgis saw all these important decrees, he began to think to himself, well, who is going to do this work? So he began to write a very simple catechism, a Q&A, or a question and answer. For example, who is Saint Mary? She is the Theotokos, the Mother of God. Who is Jesus Christ? He is the second person of the Trinity. So a simple question, doctrine, and then the answer. And he began to write this catechism. He began to gather children in the Church of St. Mary in Fagala, which is a suburb of Cairo. And he began by rote learning and memorization to teach the basic doctrines of the faith.
I think I want to meet it again. Just when you were saying end.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's doing that. And that's why I prefer to use Zoom rather than Microsoft Teams, but that's okay. What was the last thing we said?
I think it's just like one or two words
Okay.
we missed, but yeah.
Okay. Habib Giorgis was very well read, and he knew English very well, and maybe French as well, and maybe other languages, because these languages were being taught at the Great Coptic School. And he would import books from Europe on many different subjects that he would read and benefit from. For example, from Germany, there was an educational philosopher called Friedrich Froebel, and he was the one who established the kindergarten movement throughout the world. And so he wrote important educational material. Habib Giorgis was very well aware of his writings and his theories and implemented them into his curriculum in Sunday school. He also wrote 6 volumes for the teachers themselves, how to teach at the different age groups. And that was very important documents. So for every, say, grades 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 and 8, and then all the different grades, he wrote a book for the teachers, telling them what are the suitable lessons to teach the children, what are the activities that they could use, what questions they could put, what activities were suitable to do with each of these age groups, understanding the psychology of each of these age groups was all very important things that he wrote in these 6 volumes. Habib Giorgis also gave a lot of importance to the education of girls. And this is what he says, his own words about the importance of the education to girls. And let me read. He says, as for the ministry to girls after the age of 10, they are to be cared for by women who would conduct their meetings at different times than the meetings for boys. The male Sunday school teachers and the members of the Coptic Youth League. The Coptic Youth League was the term given to youth ministry at the time, and that was only for males. And the Coptic Youth League are not to interfere in or oversee the ministry to girls. Women are to set suitable activities separate from those of the Coptic Youth League. And the higher committee was a committee that was set up to care for the administration of the Sunday school movement. And the higher committee is to set up a special organization to supervise and direct the ministry of young females. So you can see it did not just care for the education of boys, but also gave great attention to the education of girls. Is there any questions so far? No questions?
I'm trying to see if anyone is writing. Feel free, anyone, if you have any questions, please.
Or you can raise your hand, or you can just speak. I hope it is all making sense so far. Okay, let us continue then. But again, do feel free to stop me if you have any questions. Habib Giorgis also used several means of popular education for those that were illiterate or could not read and write, to try to bring the message of the gospel to them as well, to the children. For example, he would import from Europe religious pictures that told many of the stories of the Old and New Testament. And they were beautiful color photos. And he would import them from Europe, and then he would reprint them in Egypt, and also would write at the back a verse and a summary of the lesson for those that knew how to read and write. But at least those that didn't would take these pictures home with them. They would have a booklet every 3 months where they can put these pictures, religious pictures, in these booklets. And so they could go over them every now and then to remind themselves of all of the lessons that they had learned in Sunday school each week. Another thing that he did, another type of popular education, was hymns. He was a poet. He wrote 4 books of hymns for the children, where he could teach them the basic doctrines of the faith and put them into words. And then he put the music from the Coptic liturgy and midnight praise and from Lent and from the month before Nativity feast and many of the tunes from the Coptic Church, so that he would maintain Coptic identity this way. He didn't want to use the Western music that had started to come into Egypt. So this was a second method of popular education that he used. The third one was the liturgy itself. So he began to encourage the students to come to church on Sunday and to partake of Holy Communion and to go to confession when they were at the appropriate age. And the liturgy, of course, as you know, is a very rich sensory experience. The child, when he comes into the church with their parents, they see the church, they see the icons, they learn this is Saint Mary, this is Saint Athanasius, this is Saint Takla Himenot, etc., etc. They learn about the different saints in the icons, they hear the hymns, they learn the hymns of the church, they learn from the music, they see the priest going around the church with the incense, the prayers of the saints going up to the heavens, etc., etc. So all the senses interact during the liturgy. This was the third method of popular education that Habib Giorgis utilized. But these pictures, for example, that he gave out, I saw a budget or a report that he had written in the late 1940s for a period of 9 months, where he records that he printed 3.25 million religious pictures. Even though that the population of Copts in Egypt at the time was 1 million and the number of students was about 43,000, but he printed 3.25 million of these religious pictures that were distributed in Egypt, in Sudan, and in Ethiopia. He distributed 2.27 million of those pictures, and the rest were put in storage for any extra needs. And at the time, it cost him 715 Egyptian pounds, which was a lot of money when you're talking back in 1948. Another important work that Habib Giorgis did was his ministry to the villages, because there were many remote villages in Egypt, and these were very poor people that were living very basic life. Unfortunately, there was no churches in these villages. And so he wrote this booklet, and what he would do, he would collect the Sunday school teachers that were university students, and during the summer break of 3 months, when they were free, he put a plan for them. He would tell them, first of all, go into the government census office and collect the census data, information, to know where the Copts are in these villages. And then he would send them 2 by 2, and they would enter into a village. Once they enter the village, they would then split, and each one would go and visit 10 families in the village. And they would take a picture of Christ, they would put it in the living room, they would give them a lesson from the Bible, they would leave with them one of the 4 Gospels as a gift, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And he told them also, before you leave on your trip, go to the office of Sunday schools at the seminary and pick up the books about the life of Christ using the Lobach method. And when I read this word Lobach, I didn't understand what it was, so I Googled it and came up someone called Frank Charles Lobach. He was an American missionary, Protestant missionary, who was sent to the Philippines to the Moro tribes to preach there. And the Moro tribes were illiterate people, and so he devised a method called each one teach one. Those that know how to read and write to teach those that could not read and write, using the life of Christ as an example. So then he was hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. How? He was teaching them how to read and write, and at the same time, they were learning about the life of Jesus Christ. So at the evening, they would collect all the villagers together. They would be able to talk to each other about the lesson that they learned that day. They would have a youth meeting for the young together. And then there was a regional office somewhere where all the problems that they had met in the village, they would report it to that regional office to try and find solutions to overcome the problems, because some of the families were not even baptizing their children. Some of them did not even know that they were Christian. And so many deep problems. Some of them were living with non-Christian families, all in the same little house. So you can imagine the difficulty. And also he encouraged the priests from the cities to come to the villages to take the holy altar board and to pray liturgies for the people there and to ask about them. So you can see that it was a very difficult situation, but Habib Giorgis tried his best to try to improve the situation. The problem he would have found with the illiteracy, though, is whether there was 2 or 3 in every village that could teach the rest of the village. But at least it gives you an idea of how he was thinking ahead of his time, trying to resolve some of these problems. In 1918, a central committee for Sunday schools was established, and Habib Giorgis was leading this, and he began to put a very powerful administration system. And he also had several conferences for the Sunday school teachers where they could discuss together many of the issues for the Sunday school movement. But here you see some of what he says about the administration of the seminary, of the Sunday school movement. Well, this is what he was doing. Habib Giorgis sought to complete a census of the Coptic community in Egypt and Sudan. The new forms accordingly requested information on the number of teachers, classes, and students, as well as the day, time, and place where classes were held. They requested details on the weekly meetings of teachers for the purpose of prayer, spiritual edification, biblical studies, and the discussion of teaching methods. All this information was to be sent to the Assistant General Director of the Coptic Sunday Schools in the See of St. Mark, right? And many, many other forms that he had where he would collect all this information. After he collected this, every year he would gather all this into an annual report about the progress of Sunday school for that year, the budget, what publications were published, what new branches were established, and then he would present this to the patriarch, to the bishops, to the clergy, in fact, to the whole church. And he continues to develop the curriculum as well. So he didn't just write this Q&A simple curriculum in 1898, but then he begins to develop the curriculum, and he speaks about this, where he says that Coptic Sunday schools in their modern revival have undergone many stages to achieve what they desire for the advancement of their curricula and the methods of teaching the children of the church, while entreating from the heart that the Lord of the church would establish them as a strong and righteous generation and return the church to its former glory. In the first stages of the establishment of Coptic Sunday schools from 1918 onward, there was just one general curriculum for all students, which was based on the gospel reading of the liturgy. Then it progressed by using the curriculum that was developed by the Theological College for primary and secondary schools. Around 1935, it was decided that separate curricula for Sunday schools for each age group would be prepared. These curricula, however, were not printed or prepared for publication until 1939, and from that time, Sunday schools attempted to improve their curricula. These curricula continued to develop and were trialed in years to follow. Particular Sunday schools in the cities and the provinces began to try systems specific to them. So you can see how he developed the curricula. He got the students at the seminary to assist him to develop it further. And then in the provinces and in the cities, he gave them the freedom to see what was necessary for them, because different regions had different needs, so they could write particular areas of the curricula that would be suited to the region. So, students in the villages, in the remote villages, their needs would obviously be different to what the needs would be to certain students that were in the cities, for example. But he also takes a holistic view of child development. And now you see how his thought develops further. And he says this. Remember, he started by doing rote learning and memorization. Now he moves a little bit away from this. He says the following: teaching is neither the dictation of advice nor of orders, nor of instruction. Rather, it is the participation between the teacher and the child in a common spirit for knowledge. Therefore, it is the teacher's duty not to dictate information or to hand out absolute orders to these children in their care, but they should provide them with the opportunity to discover everything on their own and offer sufficient assistance to enable them to make these discoveries. Among the aims of this important theory of education are: 1, to ensure that the child lives a virtuous life from an early age, and to go beyond stating mere facts about how to live it thereafter. 2, to ensure that activity gives rise to vigor. 3, to combine research with pleasure and happiness, and to reap and harvest the results to deepen the effects of research on life. And 4, to ensure that the pleasure and happiness of the children ignite their inner desire for knowledge rather than mere facts provided for memorization. So you see here how he develops his thought, and this theory that he speaks about most likely he got from his readings of the work of Friedrich Froebel. But you see that he says now education is something that is a relationship between the teacher and the student, that the student should be left, to discover things on their own, and the teacher is there as a facilitator. And also that education should be something that brings pleasure and happiness. So he wants them to be excited about learning and about being educated in their faith in this way. Holistic view of child development. But also we see how Sunday school began to change the lives of the family itself. So he tells a story. I won't read it out, but it is about a child that was 12 years old who comes to Sunday school for the first time, and the lesson was about prayer. And so this student comes home and he gathers his family together and he says to them that we're going to pray our Father, and then we are going to read one of the chapters of the Bible together. And then he turns his attention to the Father and says to him, "Oh Father," now read this part out. It says, "Oh Father, would you reclaim your status as the priest of the family? If you do not wish to do so or are incapable of such, then we have a humble request. We beseech you not to stand in the way of your son, but allow him to live in freedom in the bosom of his God." So here he's telling the father, this should be your duty to teach your family and to gather them for prayer and for reading the Bible and spiritual books. But if you're incapable of doing that, then don't disallow your son from what he's learning in Sunday school and how he's also benefiting your family. Despite obstacles, because it was not easy for him. At the beginning of his career, many of the priests would not allow him to preach in their churches because they feared him that he was educated and they were not, and he was going to take over their positions. So it was a big issue. But then when they began to understand the mission of Sunday schools, and they were given the responsibility to oversee the Sunday school branch in their church, they loved it and asked for more. And this is what he says near the end of his life. He says, "These days we are no longer in need to write about the importance of Sunday schools to the church. Its practical effects in the lives of the children and the teachers have become manifest. Its spirit and principles have nourished homes immensely. Fathers and mothers have felt its value in the lives of their children. Parents have loved it, for it has also influenced their lives in an indirect way. Children have imparted the message of life to their parents. The time in which we exerted every effort to convince our fathers, the bishops and priests, of the importance of Sunday schools has passed. Now, not only do we see them encouraging it, but requesting its expansion in all the cities and villages in their diocese. Every priest desires to have a Sunday school in his parish. Sunday schools did not reach this stage except after the clergyman trusted in it when it proved itself to be one of the members of the church. It is, in fact, among its most important members. Being in the bosom of the church allows it to develop and thrive, and from its milk One can drink and learn. One may grasp its laws and traditions and remain firm. So you see here near the end how it has developed and how now it has been fully accepted by the church, by the hierarchy, by the bishops and the priests, and by the families as well. If Pope Cyril IV is considered the father of reform, then I think Habib Giorgis deserves the title of father of education in our modern era because of all of the great work, not only in Sunday school, but I don't have time today to speak to you about all of his ministry in theological education and the seminary, which was a huge task for him. He was the dean of the seminary from 1918 until his death in 1951. But he certainly deserves this title, in my opinion, of Father of Education. But one of his students, called Murad Wahba, sums up his life like this. He says the following. He says this about Habib Giorgis. The great teacher has failed in his reform, but he failed where shortcoming and failure are considered an honor. It was the failure of a martyr, because he devoted all of his life to his ministry in the church towards religious and theological education. And the Copts take great historical pride in their martyrs. Even their failures are a source of strength and courage. And Habib Giorgis had a clear goal and vision to make the Coptic Orthodox Seminary to rise to the highest international standards of the day. But one can feel his heartache and pain and struggles that he had not achieved all of his goals. And at the end of his life, you feel his bitterness that he wasn't able to achieve everything he wanted. And this is a very powerful and beautiful quote that we can end with. Despite efforts that sapped my health and crushed my strength, I did not surrender for one day to anyone who resisted or envied me. This is a great grace that I do not deserve, as one cannot be envious or resistant, except the one who does not have grace. Stones are thrown only at the trees that are filled with fruits, and birds peck only at ripe fruits. I thank God Almighty that through his grace, despair never penetrated my soul for even one day. But in fact, I constantly smile at the resistances. I have forgiven and will continue to forgive from the depth of my heart everyone who desires to be my enemy in vain, knowing that it is inevitable that obstacles will come along the path of those who desire to serve God and people. It is inevitable that there is no honey without the bee's sting. And he who abandons positive work for the sake of the murmurings of people resembles the horse that bolts when it sees its own shadow. Gold does not lose its value if it is rejected by animals, and the sun is not blemished if you cannot see it one day. It is imperative that we do not fail in doing good, for we shall reap the harvest in due time if we do not weary. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So you can see very powerful words, but you can also feel the hurt that he was feeling because of those that were resisting him, whether it was the lay community council or some of the clergy or laity at the time. But what can we learn then from Habib Giorgis? We can learn that he was a resilient character. He did not give up easily. He was tenacious. He was strong at the times of darkness. He had a great love for the church and the hierarchy. He had a great love for the children that he was serving. He had a great passion for his work and his ministry, for reading and research and study. The great proper administration system. You cannot have an education system that works properly without proper administration. He was an innovator. He thought outside of the box, right? He didn't just think in classical ways, but he always was thinking of new ideas. Sometimes I wonder if he was living now with the internet and all of the advanced technology that we have, how he could have utilized all of this. But he was also a man who was righteous and just, and he did not bear grudges against those that worked against him. And he was an eloquent preacher with a sonorous voice, a very powerful voice. When he spoke, people wanted to listen and learn from what he had to say. And he was also a reformer. He wrote a very important book at the end of his life in 1942, How to Reform the Coptic Orthodox Church in a period of 10 years. We are indebted to this modern saint for bringing the Coptic Church into the 20th century and doing all of this educational reform. And I think if it was not for him, maybe the Coptic Church would have still been suffering a lot of problems. And so we are deeply indebted to him. I'm also deeply indebted to all of you for your attention and for listening. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Sayyidina, for the wonderful presentation. It's incredibly beautiful. Again, all of you, Sayyidina, I believe most of the reading were from this one, this book. I know, Aman, on the chat, you have texted where Sayyidina is reading from. And there is a question from Alim. How can we facilitate the type of learning environment? That's one of the questions presented. Basically, like, how can we, Alim, if you want to unmute yourself and expand your question, that would be great as well. But again, thank you, Sayyidina. Alim, do you want to unmute yourself? Let me know.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sayana. Please keep me in your prayers. I had a question because earlier in the book, he speaks about fostering an environment where students are encouraged to kind of learn on their own or sort of pursue things that interest them rather than us force feeding them information. And it seems like a fantastic idea, but practically, I don't know how to create that kind of environment where students, are kind of their creativity. It seems what he's saying is their creativity drives them, their own interest drives them to learn more.
Yeah. So really what he was saying here is that the teacher is there as a facilitator, guiding the students, because the students don't have all the knowledge, but the teacher gives them something, then the teacher is wanting them to begin to think and to discover things. But if they go off the track, right, and they have the wrong ideas, the teacher is there to guide them back on the right way, right? So that's what Habib Giorgis was trying to say here. Not that they come up with their own ideas, right, that could be far away from the faith. If you remember back in the history, right, at the time of the Council of Nicaea, there was a priest in Alexandria called Arius, and he began to have his own thoughts, right, about the nature of Christ, and he deviated from the faith and ended up that the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea excommunicated him for his wrong teaching because he was going to lead so many people astray, right? So the teacher has an important duty here to facilitate and to guide the students and make sure that they're going in the upright path and not having their own strange ideas. They can have ideas, obviously, but the teacher is there to correct them. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so is there a difference between the Eritrean and Ethiopian Orthodox liturgy and the Egyptian Coptic Orthodox liturgy?
I think in the Eritrean Ethiopian Church, there is many more liturgies than what we have in the Coptic Orthodox Church. We have 3 main liturgies that we use now. The most popular one that is usually used on Sundays is the liturgy of Saint Basil, but also we have the liturgy of Saint Gregory, which sometimes during great feasts it is prayed, and then also the liturgy of Saint Cyril, mainly used during the Great Lent and some of the fasts of the church.
So how come like they're all not the same?
Well, the teaching is very similar, but more liturgies were developed in the Ethiopian Eritrean Church, but maybe the deacon would like to add something.
Thank you, Sayyidina. Yeah, thank you for your question. Because we don't have enough time, I want all of us to focus on this presentation. Regarding the similarity and differences of our anaphoras, I think we can invite our scholar, Cassis Mabrahatikiros, and we also have another great scholar, Dr. Habta Mikael Kirane, who had spent years of studying those divine liturgy. If there's any questions, please let's keep them here on this similar topic, please. Apology, Yael. I don't mean to offend. I don't mean to undermine your question, but we can focus here. Any other questions, some like related to Habib Giorgis and the 20th century of the Coptic Orthodox Church?
Yeah. One of the questions we had was, how come Saint Habib Giorgis was pronounced a saint in the 21st century, and is it possible to become a saint now?
Yes, so we don't have like a time limit, like in the Catholic Church, that 50 years have to pass before someone is canonized as a saint, but there is a committee within the synod that studies the life of the person. Obviously, there has to be a good time period that has passed since their death, and then we look at their life, we look at what is the response from the community towards this name or this person. So there's many factors and criteria that are put there by the synod, and then once this committee completes its report, it raises the report to the synod for a vote whether this person, after everyone has read the report from the subcommittee, should be then announced as or canonized as a saint within the Coptic Orthodox Church. Yes, so there is still hope for you.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thank you again, Yael. We appreciate it. I have another question that was texted into Grinya, so I'm going to try. I think the one part of it you already responded, but the other question related to that is, are there any churches dedicated to Saint Habib Giorgis right now? And if so, how many of them, like how many churches, if you're aware?
Yeah. Yes. There is one church here in New Jersey that's dedicated to Saint Habib Giorgis that I'm aware of. I think I prayed the first liturgy when that church was established several years ago. There is one in Sydney, Australia. There is also some priests that were ordained by the name of Father Habib Giorgis. I'm not sure if in any other diocese in America or Canada, or maybe in Europe, but I'm sure there's probably a few more. But those at least are the two that I'm aware
of. Thank you again, Sayyidina. Any question? If there are not, I would like to ask Sayyidina as well. You did discuss about the Saint Habib Giorgis' contribution on the divine liturgy and his active participation and his encouragement in the partaking of the Eucharist, which is central in our Orthodox tradition. What was the, I guess, the frequency of partaking of the Eucharist before? Today, whenever I'm joining any divine liturgy within our Coptic Church, almost everyone is participating, which is not really common in our tradition. There is, I mean, it's coming back. There is a lot of encouragements, but
he probably started that movement, and then it was more advanced or encouraged at the time of Saint Pope Cyril VI, who was praying daily liturgies and vespers, and so this encouraged more people to come to the church and to partake of Holy Communion, because at the time of Habib Giorgis, as I mentioned, many people were not coming to church and many were not taking Holy Communion, and he began to write and to speak about this and began to change this and to make and to encourage the people to come and to see the beauty of the liturgy and to learn from the liturgy and to partake of the Eucharist.
Thank you, Tina. Any other questions? Just a welcoming question. Until someone else asked, another question that I had encouraged, I think you also discussed about this while you were presenting, but Saint Habib Giorgis was a deacon, and as you mentioned, the challenge that he was facing on the one hand was from clergies, mostly priestess and parish pastors. And then the other thing that also you indirectly was heading into, I mean, you did emphasize on that, but the idea of Sunday school itself, obviously did not start in Egypt. It was somehow, it definitely was a Protestant origin. So
Yes.
was there part of the resistance that Saint Habib Giorgis faced, was it related to that because Sunday school was kind of a foreign tradition that was like that Saint Habib Giorgis was trying to grounded it like within the church and to use it like, you know.
Yeah, because the Protestants, when they came to Egypt, they established what was known as Sabbath schools. So on Saturdays, they had this religious education for the young. And so Habib Giorgis took the idea from them. There is no doubt about that. But when he took it, he didn't take it just as it is, but then he baptized it to be Orthodox, so that the teachings would be in accordance with the teachings of the Coptic Orthodox Church. But certainly some of the resistance would have been because of what you mentioned, that was something Western, something foreign. And so people were a bit skeptical about this until they saw the benefit and they saw that the teaching that he was presenting was sound and was Orthodox, and that's why they accepted it.
Thank you, Sayyidina. Any other questions? If you are, yeah, go ahead, Ferry.
Thank you, Sayyidina, for reflections on Saint Habib Giorgis. My question is, as you have said, Habib Giorgis was challenged by the clergy from the monasteries and maybe bishops also and lay people. Was there any challenges from the governmental parties or?
Yeah, probably he had an important role to play in introducing religious education in public schools. And at first there was resistance from the government, and he had to lobby along with others for the government to accept, because they were teaching the Muslim students Islamic faith, but the Christian students were not being taught their Orthodox faith. So he lobbied the government, and finally they accepted that the curriculum that he wrote would be the curriculum that would be taught in public schools to Christian students. And he began to educate the Christian teachers in those schools how to teach his curriculum to the Christians in the public schools.
Thank you again, Sayyidina. Was it?
Is
You
that
get yeah? Wonderful. Let's see if there's any more questions. We are past our time actually. It's 3:33. Before concluding our session and have a final blessing and prayer from Sayyidina, I would like to invite anyone. I know Father Tekla Haymanot from Vegas was trying to present a Mizmur. I don't think he's in a good timing right now, but I would like to invite one of you to present our hymns to Sayyidina as thank you. And of course, Sayyidina deserves more than that, but that's what we can offer right now. And Sayyidina, he dedicated his time and the whole wonderful presentation. Again, if you want to read Sayyidina's wonderful book, Habib Giorgis, Coptic Orthodox Educator and Light in Darkness. It was published by Saint Vladimir's Orthodox Seminary Press. You can find it on Amazon, like anywhere that's, like including Amazon, eBay, like and other medias. But I would like to invite again one more person who can do the song. Okay, I will, please apology, Sayyidina. I am having a little food, but I'm gonna give it a try. So this is basically saying, Barakan Abba Mafkari Hisanat, I would say like Sayyidina, or we usually add like the bishop's name. I can add your name or just like say Sayyidina. Simply means like, bless me, your grace, who is a lover of children. اسمع أنت سباك وإنجيل حديث, like you are the preacher of the gospel of news. That's what simply means. But I was thinking like in English. باركن أبا مفكره سنات سيدنا باركن أبا مفكره سنات سيدنا اسمع أنت سباك وإنجيل حديث سباك وإنجيل حديث اسمع أنت سباك وإنجيل حديث سباك وإنجيل حديث باركني أبا مفكره صنعت سيدنا باركني أبا مفكره صنعت سيدنا اسمع أنت مفتاح سباك وإنجيل حديث سباك وإنجيل حديث اسمع أنت ሰባኬ ወንጌል ሐዲስ ሰባኬ ወንጌል ሐዲስ ባርከን አባ መፍቀር ሕፃናት ኢና ባርከን አባ መፍቀር ሕፃናት ኢና እስመ አንተ ሰባኬ ወንጌል ሐዲስ ሰባኬ ወንጌል ሐዲስ እስመ አንተ ሰባኬ ወንጌል ሐዲስ ሰባኬ ወንጌል ሐዲስ please keep us in your prayers. Sayyidina, you deserve much more than this. As you know, we are doing it like in a social media and virtual, and we don't have our drums, we don't have our choirs, but hopefully one day, either you might visit us somewhere in the DMV area, and especially in Baltimore, where we have our choir all together, and we will get your blessing. But we will again thank you so much. We are highly grateful for your time and for your work, and for presenting Saint Habib Giorgis. May his prayers and intercessions be with us. It's incredible to read your book. It's just inspiring, and one day hopefully we will have another session, maybe in person, and get the full time. We don't have to rush with the timing, and that way like we can kiss your hands as well. I would let you go ahead and bless us with your final concluding prayer. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity. It's been a great joy and a blessing. Lovely to hear all the beautiful Ethiopian hymns, and I love the Ethiopian tradition and the hymns of the Eritrean Church, and have experienced a little bit of it when I was a monk in the monastery, and we had certain conferences, and people from Eritrea and Ethiopia were there chanting, so lots of lovely memories. But God bless you all, and I hope I get the opportunity to come and visit in Baltimore. I know I have a trip. I have to come to Washington to the Bible Museum, so I don't think it is too far away, so maybe we can arrange it in the future, God willing. Thank you again. The love of God the Father and the grace of his only begotten Son and the gift and fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Go in peace. May the peace of the Lord be with you.
Amen. Thank you again. Thank you everyone, our participants from everywhere, from Canada, from Europe, from Germany, from Holland, from New Jersey, New York, California. I see a lot of names and from Vegas. So thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you again, Sayyidina.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.